All right, good day, everyone, and welcome to the GBAC Policy and Practice Subcommittee meeting. I'm Stephanie Hardison, the Deputy Designated Federal Officer, along with Boris Rathia, the Designated Federal Officer. Today's event is being recorded and will be posted to our website with all relevant meeting material. And there will be time for any relevant comments or statements towards the end for the public. We will now open the meeting for the Policy and Practice Chair. David, take it away.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I will be taking the places of both myself as co-chair, David Wagger, and the chair, Luke Basis, on today's meeting. We have some great speakers today, and I would like to provide some background on our speakers today before jumping into their presentations. So as you may recall, at the previous meeting in January, our colleague Amlan Mukherjee presented on 4 ideas for recommendations in tools and technology. These were develop a principles-based framework, which are supposed to be quantitative, objective, and standards-based. The second recommendation was adopt ISO Type 3 labels, which are things like EPDs and product carbon footprints. The third recommendation was develop robust data infrastructure for consistency and reliability, and those are things like life cycle inventories and integrating reporting tools so they're all consistent and harmonious with each other. And then the last fourth idea was a sustainable curriculum development accredited by a third party and maybe centered in a Center for Sustainability Excellence. So today's presentations are really going to look at the second and third recommendations in the areas of ISO Type 3 labels, EPDs, and also develop robust data infrastructure. So I'm going to introduce our presenters who are from CIEVO. It's Ilona Kavamaki and Ossi Karali, who are going to present on the type of system that they maintain for their clients, just as an example. And then after discussion for that, we'll have our second presenter, which is Peter Arbuckle, who's with USDA. And we'll take questions after each presentation. And then after that, we will have sort of a subcommittee discussion about key takeaways and how we can move this forward toward a recommendation focused on May of later this year. So I'm going to turn the screen over to Ilona and Ossi. So thank you very much for joining us from Finland. It's 10 o'clock at night or so. So I don't want to keep you up too late. So without further ado, please take it away.
Thank you, David. I'm just going to share my screen. I hope you can see the slides. Can you see them? Great.
Yes.
But hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and yes, indeed, greetings from the other part of the world, Finland. And thank you so much for having us. It's an honor to be able to contribute to the discussion around the decarbonization journey. But my name is Ilona Kivimäki. I'm Sustainability Sales Executive at CIEVO, and gonna give you the informational presentation today, talking about the supply chain emissions, engagement with the suppliers, but also then sharing some of the use cases and experiences of the companies that we work with. And I'm actually today also with my colleague Ossi. Ossi, a few words about yourself as well.
Yes, good to meet you, everyone. So Ossi is the name, VP of Sales, so responsible for the global sales function at CIEVO, and actually also currently our managing director of our US office based out of Chicago. So we have about 300 people in Europe, but in addition to that, we have about 50 people or so here in US, most based out of Chicago, but also across the country. So slightly less late call for me, afternoon time for me, unlike for Ilona. But yeah, I think Ilona will be running the show, so I'll hand it back over to her.
Great, thank you, Ossi. Okay, before going into the main topic of the day, just a few words about the us at the company. So we are a procurement analytics company born actually in Finland, and we are turned 20 years last December. So we have been on the market for a long time, but indeed the company has grown. So we have over 360 employees, and as Ossi mentioned, quite a big team in the US, but also over 200 people in Finland, and then rest in Bucharest. But we are serving large global customers. I have cherry-picked some of the companies that you may recognize, but we are serving different industries. What unites them is that those are large enterprises with very complex supply chains, and of course, huge volumes of data to process. But without further ado, let's go into the main topic of the day. Of course, the urgency around sustainability and particularly around climate is quite huge. Important time perspective that I love to highlight is that every 5 weeks represents 1% of the decade. Just think about it. Every 5 weeks represents 1% of the decade. That's quite a lot. And those sustainability targets that sustainability officers or marketing officers have set ultimately will come to the procurement function around how they engage with the supplier base to actually transform and engage. And of course, we have already a lot of pressure coming our way with the regulations, especially in Europe. We see that quite a lot, but of course, also in the US, we start to see emerge of the regulations as well. This is a hypothesis, but also a view that a lot of companies that we work with and talk to share the concern of that procurement professionals will have to do the sustainability work and GHG emission calculations on top of the work that they are already doing today. So probably not going to get a lot of new resources. Of course, some of the companies may have get 1 or 2 persons into procurement function just to kind of get the build up the center of excellence, get the DNA into it. But of course, it comes to the fact that companies need to incorporate sustainability into the work of category managers and also the procurement professionals as well. Of course, great thing is automation. While not getting the resources in, it's very important for the organizations to have a look into AI, how to automate, and then also how to accelerate the work that they are already doing within the scope 3. So to do more with less. And how to get to the net zero, how to accelerate the streams around it. Those are the main streams that we see our customers and companies on the market work on quite a lot. Of course, starting with the improved scope 3 management, I would also say that even the very important step before that, starting measuring the emissions. But of course, then once they start, what we see now on the market and among the customers, that the most utilized calculation method is still the spend-based. So 80% of the data is actually used calculating that, but then around 15% is the quantity-based calculations, and only 5% of the calculations are able to take into account supplier-specific factors. So data like material level specific factors or product level specific factors. So of course, it's important to start the journey and then improve it along the way. Important thing that companies have already enough data to start creating action. But then of course, once we have the foundation and we understand, for example, the hotspots, what categories to focus on, what suppliers to focus on, supplier engagement plays a role. And we see now that many of the companies starting different programs with the suppliers engaging top, for example, 500 or 1,000 suppliers, helping them to set science-based target, also emphasizing on the fact that they need to also inform and provide information to the CDP, or for example, do the assessment with the eco bodies or the Integrity Next. And also, of course, many are creating different incentive programs to to benefit the more sustainable behavior, or even create different new sort of agreements where they will bind suppliers not only based on the price or quality, but based on the fact that are suppliers able to provide supplier specific factors on a material level or on a product level that they provide to the companies, and are they able to have they set science-based targets or not. And of course, the supplier engagement also goes into the doing the collaboration with the suppliers to reduce different emissions. We see a lot of reduction initiatives, for example, how to reduce 20% within specific category, optimizing packaging, optimizing product design, working only with the suppliers that utilize energy, renewable energy in their production, and so on. So how to really automate those streams? Of course, it starts with the data and data extraction. It's very important to get access to the procurement systems, ERPs. Really doesn't matter where customers have the data, but get as much as possible, and then cleanse it, classify it, perform the supplier consolidation, so to ensure that we have this foundation before we can even do the emission mapping or emission calculations. And specifically, of course, for the emission data enrichment part, what we do in Sieva, we utilize different databases. For example, Exia-based EcoInvent, leading databases to extract the average emission factors on a category or material level. But then, of course, if it's possible to get also supplier-specific factors directly from suppliers, or also get the data on a company level from the CDP. So doing this data enrichment, having this different hybrid calculation methods, and always being able to then improve the calculations based on the data you are able then to get. But then also when it comes to the broader ESG area, also taking the data from different data sources, like, for example, EcoVadis or IntegrityNext, or it could be any other third-party service provider that could then give the holistic visibility or supplier scoring across the ESG metrics. But also very important entity that we see that our customers and also many companies in Europe are emphasizing on is the science-based targets. So what they actually do, they are reporting how much of their suppliers have set or committed to the science-based targets. They also setting KPIs on it. And if we think about companies who has 30,000-40,000 of suppliers, that's a lot of manual mapping. So then also being able to automate that process fully for them, and then for them to have access and see who are the suppliers and what their near-term or long-term targets are. But of course, this kind of process enables to have the unified calculations across the whole enterprise. So for example, having enterprises with different multiple ERPs, different data sources. We also have customers with having the challenges that each business unit, for example, have their own calculation methods, have their own view of the emissions. So it's very important to have this one source of truth across the whole enterprise, and then from that to get into the actually emission insights and to take action. I see there's something in the chat. Should we go through the questions later on, or should I continue?
Yeah, that was just a clarification from David, I think, on the CDP, that it's a carbon disclosure project. So.
Yes, thank you, David. Indeed, carbon disclosure project. Yes, let's go through the case studies. First one I would like to stay a few minutes on is Hikma. Hikma is a multinational pharmaceutical company headquartered in London, and they operate 32 manufacturing facilities across 10 countries. The biggest challenge for them was that they have done the emission mapping and emission calculation manually. Also, they had different emission calculations across different facilities and in different countries. So they wanted to have this unified standardized way of calculating emissions, but also automate this process completely to have more time to focus on for example, driving the sustainability strategy and different sustainability initiatives. And once that piece of the puzzle was solved, now it's all about actually focusing on the data quality improvement. Hikma also one of the customers that is doing mostly the spend-based calculations. So now also working on how they could improve their data and data quality to do more detailed calculations utilizing, for example, quantity-based calculation methods. And then, of course, engaging with their suppliers, getting this detailed information and performing more detailed calculation methods. Deutsche Telekom, this is telecommunication company from Germany. They are present in 50 plus countries, and they're a publicly listed company, and actually 30% of the company is owned by the German government. But they are doing a lot within the sustainability. They actually is one of the companies that have now drafted strict agreements where they will bind suppliers and have the whole evaluation criteria and selection criteria during the tendering process, or for example of their existing suppliers, based on the fact that are the suppliers able to provide the supplier specific factors on a material level or on a product level or on a service level, and whether they have set or committed to the science-based targets or not. And they also have subscription to the CDP, where they utilize this hybrid calculation method. So for some of the categories, they utilize average emission factors, but then where possible, they also take the data from the CDP, where we do the calculations, and then of course the supplier specific factors as well. And what this unified way of calculation, of course, automation of these processes have given Deutsche Telekom is this one single source of truth of the supply chain emissions. Of course, also the data extraction is happening automatically, emission mapping as well. And they have quite a lot of data volume. So they have over $175 billion of USD dollars spent, and then also 30 plus data sources that are actually mapped to the carbon data. But also then, of course, having these interactive dashboards for different team members across the whole organization. And if you think about the logins that they have, so the procurement teams are taking following on the KPIs within the system, but then also the sustainability finance team and compliance team as well. But this is kind of a holistic view also, of course, enables to have the drill down and understand, okay, what is actually happening behind each category, and having their own taxonomy, so they're able to actually have a very deep dive into the 5-level taxonomy as well. And yes, so carbon emissions actually became Deutsche Telekom's second currency. And speaking of the CDP, I think one very interesting source of information about the company's sustainability actions, of course, sustainability reports, but I think very insightful source of knowledge about the company's reduction initiatives or reduction projects and the supplier engagement is the CDP. CDP reports that they publish about of different companies that have then disclosed information to them. And actually, before going into the demo, I would like to go and show some examples of what information can be found on the CDP site. I think in order to provide some inspiration about different supplier initiatives and projects and engagement, this is one of the good source of information for sure. So if you have never visited this CDP site, it's actually very easy to just create your own username, and then please go to the section 12, which is the engagement, and you will find all of the secrets behind the sustainability performance and supplier engagement of different companies. Of course, not all yet have disclosed their information for the CDP, but of course, different big players that are strongly approaching the decarbonization journey can be found here. I know that Pfizer, for example, also has their report in it. So if you're interested, I really recommend to dive into that. But here you can see that, for example, what kind of type of the engagement Deutsche Telekom now has. So it's all about changing the supplier behavior. They're focusing on the 100% of their suppliers, 100% of the spend. And then you can go and see very detailed information. For example, what kind of details of the engagement. So they're actually going to collect the data from these suppliers through us annually. Also then checking the targets of the science-based targets, but then of course also collecting other information, for example, risk-related information or any documentation about the climate transition plan and so on. And also you can now see that, for example, they have 445 suppliers that they have invited in 2022, but of course that list has grown already during the last year. And that is actually covering 80% of their procurement volume. But yeah, some recommendation if you haven't yet visited this site and section. I think it's very, very insightful indeed. But now let's go into the live demo. Yes, so let me select the previous year to have more data in place, and also we could have maybe the USD currency as well. But this is Sievo's demo environment where we have now the CO2 main overview. So this is after data has been extracted from the various data sources, ERP procurement systems, and then of course cleansed, categorized. And you can see that we have calculated emissions of 6.08 billion of spend. Also, then emissions are now currently at this food conglomerate company are 4.07 million, and then being able to have the holistic visibility into the breakdown of different emissions. So now we have, for example, emissions by the spend category, where we have the company's own taxonomy. Then, of course, emissions by the organization. And of course, please keep in mind that since we are serving organizations from various industries, of course, the dashboards vary between different companies. So some would prefer to have the view of the emissions by organization. Some, of course, would like to have it by business unit or production plant and so on. Plus, of course, we now see the emerging of the regulations and new requirements. So, for example, now different companies that have, for example, forest, land, and agriculture emissions that actually go flag emissions, they would need to start measuring and reporting them separately. So in addition to having, for example, the dashboard with the emissions by the greenhouse gas protocol, some of our customers will also have the emissions by, for example, FAC emissions, or we have this CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism for the different products of, for example, steel, iron, cement, hydrogen that will come outside of Europe will also need to be reported, and suppliers will need to provide very detailed information about the product that they will send to Europe, and provide the calculated emission factor based on what then we will have the carbon tax as well. So of course, the technology needs to be ready to answer these different requirements that are coming all the time. So to be able to support the customers with their pain points. But once we see this holistic visibility into the emissions, of course, it's very now important to also understand the hotspots. What, for example, are the categories, suppliers, or regions that you could perhaps focus on. So then also focusing on the, for example, carbon intensity by the spend category, we could, for example, select, let's stick with the example of the Deutsche Telekom. So we could actually select the indirect, and then also take, for example, IT and telecommunication, and see how are we doing there. Based on this dashboard, we can see that IT hardware is actually one of the most carbon intensive category, and then also selecting that and seeing, okay, what are the top countries that purchasing currently this from. We have Switzerland, Norway, Estonia, Canada. If we actually would like to see what is happening within the Canada, who are the suppliers that we should maybe engage with, we can then find our top 20, 50, 100 suppliers that we are purchasing the IT hardware from. And of course, this is one way to now send the questionnaire to these suppliers, ask for more detailed information, whether they're able to provide material category specific or material specific, product specific emission factors. And then of course, start the reduction journey with them, perhaps then create some reduction initiatives as well. And in order to understand the underlying data behind those charts and graphs, we can go into the CO2 metadata. In here, have the crystal clear visibility into what kind of data points have been utilized, how the emission calculation actually been done. So seeing different levels of categories, information about the suppliers, material level information, if that's applicable. Of course, then the country of region, because when you do the calculations, that will impact quite a lot what emission factor to take into the calculations, and then seeing, of course, whether you have been doing the spend-based calculations, quantity-based calculations, or, for example, utilizing the supplier-specific data. This is also something, of course, the data quality or quality of the emission calculations is one of the KPIs most of the companies are now monitoring. So really understanding how much of our spend is actually calculated utilizing spend-based, quantity-based versus supplier-specific factors. So of course, always improving the data and then monitoring that as well. And of course, it's all about having the actionable insights. Of course, very important to see what kind of data quality improvements you could have there, what kind of decarbonizing opportunities lies. For example, if you would like to switch from one material to another. So if, for example, you are purchasing two materials, same materials from two different suppliers. So really then understanding what are the decarbonizing opportunities based on the CO2 emissions, but then of course also based on the spend as well. And the monitoring targets, which allows to also monitor the progress, see the baseline, what is the reduction target. For example, if the company is committed to become net zero, have set the science-based targets, they're able to bring the goal into the tool, and then always monitor, okay, what is the reduction target for each year, and what are the realized emissions as well. And we also have the for example, the simulation of how the emissions will look like if the business continues as usual as well. And as mentioned before, of course, in order to drive the emission reduction targets, suppliers play a crucial role in that. So, for example, integration with the science-based targets could really then allow to see what is happening within the supplier targets and their reduction journey. So understanding whether they have set or committed to the science-based targets or not. And then one final thing I would like to demonstrate regarding all the streams. So now we had for example, of course, the scope 3 emission calculation, then we had the supplier engagement. And then if we think about the different innovation and actions with the suppliers, so for example, creating the reduction initiatives together with the suppliers, I can show you some examples of what the companies are doing there as well. I guess it's also a bit too late for the demo since it's a bit lagging, but hopefully we'll get it running in a few seconds.
In the meanwhile, there's Ilona one question in the chat as well.
Yes. So I will just show this one and then quickly go into the questions. So last part of the demo. But yes, so the reduction initiative. So being able then also to create different projects with the suppliers. Of course, it could be, for example, let's view the top reduction projects within the companies we have been working with. So for example, the different optimization of the packaging, of the design, so changing suppliers to the low CO2 intensity countries, find alternatives for the CO2 intensive heating. So some of the examples of the reduction initiatives that could be as well. But okay, I think let's go now into the questions to make sure we stay right on time. If I will now open the chat. Would a cement or concrete manufacturer be measured on the emissions when the product is used, or just on the energy used in its initial creation as a powder? Yes, so it of course depends on the data, what kind of data this specific manufacturer are able to provide. Usually, of course, if they give the supplier emission factor on the product level, that is also already taken into account the whole life cycle. So from extraction of raw materials, then of course the energy utilized during the production, and then also end use of and possible recycling as well. I see there's some hands raised.
Yes, Stacy was next.
Hey, thank you. So I have like a zillion questions because of my day job. I run a nonprofit that called Building Transparency, that has an EC3 tool that has EPDs that we've digitized that we're using to help construction procurement folks actually do scope 3 emissions using quantities times product specific factors out of EPDs. And I'm curious, we've done some analysis for them. And I appreciate that you have the ability for both the quantity times carbon intensity value of a product or the cost times emissions factor. If you're seeing a trend towards that more accurate accounting with folks using your system, And if you even look at for construction where EPDs are very prevalent now and provide you a verified emission source if you're leveraging that in your accounting methods.
I had a bit problems with hearing the first part of the question. If you can please repeat that.
So
the connection broke a bit.
It's okay.
Regarding the calculation methods.
Yeah, so I appreciate that you have the ability to use actual quantity of material times actual carbon intensity of manufacture.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because we know that's better, because spend doesn't scale with emissions of production, as we decarbonize stuff. So are you seeing a trend towards that with your customers or with the regulations that you're helping them comply with? You know, hopefully your answer is yes, because that's what we need. But that's my first question. And the second one is if you're leveraging EPD data for the construction sector, since that is becoming more prevalent as a verified source of LCA data.
Yeah. Thank you, Stacey. Very good questions indeed. But yes, so what we see that companies are emphasizing quite a lot on the improvement of their data quality. But reality, as I mentioned, so 80% are currently utilizing spend-based calculations. Around 15 are utilizing quantity-based calculations, and only 5% actually able to take into account supplier-specific factors. But if we think about, for example, the science-based targets, the requirements that are coming from there, setting the emissions, of course, they are emphasizing on the fact that for example, emission targets should be set based on the quantifiable method, not based on the spend. So definitely that is the area many companies are focusing on. So I would see that the market will change in a 2 year or 3, where it will not be even possible to calculate the emissions utilizing the spend method. But the reality to this day is a bit sad, and of course we need to take into account the maturity level of the suppliers as well. But when it comes to the EPDs, so yes, so for example, you're able to send requests to your suppliers and ask for more detailed information on a material or a product level, and they're also they are able to attach, for example, different documentation like emission certificates, EPDs as well. So this is something that companies are requesting as well. And of course, now we also see that some of the EPDs are actually also including the emission factor of the product as well. Not all of them, but some start.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you.
Some start
in my other life. We have an API to our EPD database in my day job, so I would love to talk to you further about that, because I'm passionate about getting to this data being so quality.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Nicole.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. Super useful. I as well have a ton of questions, but I'm drawn to 2. One is, to what extent has CIEVO engaged government clients? What barriers are you seeing that's unique to the public sector? And then what sort of, so maybe this is 3, it's contingent on the first one though. In what sort of ways are you having to adapt to the needs of government clients, assuming that is a central area that you engage with? What does this landscape look like?
Yeah, well, most of our, like all of our customers are publicly private companies or publicly listed companies. So for example, actually one example that come closely to the governmental entities is Deutsche Telekom, because actually 30% of them owned.
So that one's hybrid. What I'm asking is, do you have any clients that are exclusively government at this point?
Unfortunately, not yet. We are in discussion with a few of them, but not yet any reference we could give.
Yeah, so this is a really good starting point for what do you see, because you're having conversations, what do you see as being the unique barriers for the public sector client? And are you seeing certain needs that are a bit different from that in the private sector?
Yeah, I would think that based on the discussions that we are having with the public sector, is that the kind of data security, data sharing, being able to actually get access to the data is one of the biggest challenges and one of the kind of main barriers. Because if we think about overall sustainability challenges or pain points, of course, they are also quite the same with what, for example, private companies are dealing with. The regulations, of course, applies to them as well, and they need to do also, of course, the emission calculation and then engagement with their suppliers. But I think that kind of the most important step is how to really then allow the access to the data from various sources, and then being able to work with that first, create this foundation before even performing any emission mapping, emission calculation. I also could maybe ask Ossi, do you have anything to add regarding the barriers based on the discussions you had with the public entities?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary overall, and of course the kind of concept is similar in a way. Of course, with certain public sector engagement, of course the kind of categories of spend that one might be buying can be extremely wide compared to a kind of organization that's focused on producing something specific. So there is often a much wider scope of what the organization is buying, which might create some challenges, or at least a unique circumstance.
One thing that you said that really resonates with me, it goes back to this notion of don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And we don't have perfect measures as yet, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be exploring the landscape and getting our hands dirty and thinking through what those complexities are, because there's no way you can just jump to perfect. You got to go through good first.
That's a really good, very good point. And that's something like talking in conferences with procurement professionals, for example, here in the US, I think many are scared and confused about the fact that, hey, I have whatever, 50,000 suppliers, and do I need to go to all of them and start asking them about their sustainability, and where do I start and all of that? But like, starting from somewhere, getting the baseline, and then identifying the hotspots and going towards them is the key thing.
So I have other questions.
Yeah, and I think also,
sorry, go ahead.
No, also having this myth that the data is already perfect. So like usually we have the prospect that are like, yeah, but we cannot start because we only can do the spend-based calculations. And I'm like, yeah, that's what others are doing. So also I think it's very important to create the awareness and to talk about the issue, and then help, of course, companies to engage together, share the best practices, and then kind of collaboratively then decide how to improve the data quality. And perhaps, of course, now we have seen the emerge of, for example, different open data sources or different data providers that are able then to help companies to fill the gap within the data quality as well.
So Ilona and Ossi, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I think everybody would like to spend 2 more hours with you. Given that it's close to 11 o'clock, I think where you are, probably not a good idea. I want to thank Luke for having the connection with you and arranging to have you present to us. So I want to thank him and thank you for your time of presentation. I think a copy will be put into the folders for all of the subcommittee and other committees to look at and ponder over. I'll defer to Boris or Stephanie about your any of your conversations with CFO at all on your own, but I'd like to thank you. And then we have another speaker, Peter Arbuckle from USDA, and he's going to actually talk about things that probably are inputs to the kind of system that CFO has set up for its clients. And I'd like to thank Amlan, I think, for starting that conversation and arranging for Peter to be with us today. So I'm going to, again, thank Ilona and Ossi, and then turn the screen over to Peter with help from our FAC officers to begin his presentation.
Great. Thanks, David. I'm going to keep my video off. Or are you guys going to forward the slides, or am I?
We can forward the slides if you like us to do so, Peter.
It doesn't matter to me. Okay, I'm going to turn my video off just because I had some bandwidth issues in the last hour. So apologize for that. But yeah, thanks for the time. My name is Peter Arbuckle. I'm a chief of the Scientific Data Management Branch at the National Agricultural Library, which is part of USDA's Agricultural Research Service. Next slide. I'm going to talk more about product level LCA and EPDs as the conversation went in the last session, and I appreciated the the sentiment there that it's all about progress right now, and nothing's perfect, and we're just trying to make progress toward better, and that really kind of encapsulates what we're doing with the federal LCA Commons. I'll talk a little bit about spend a little time talking about nutrition labels as perhaps a demonstration of what's possible in the future, or a model of where EPDs may evolve. And then I'll describe the federal LCA Commons, and then some progress we've made on background data and knowledge management. Next slide. So I caught this theory of change concept from a colleague at EPA, Allison Kin, who works in EPA's labeling programs, environmental labeling programs. And the top boxes just reflect kind of the progression of how labels can make major industry or market or major impact reductions. And I overlaid that on the the innovation diffusion graph to illustrate how market uptake really speeds up once reliable information is available. And the product label can only become effective once the market and product information is reliable, and the information only becomes reliable as we standardize measurement and reporting, and of course communication. And that's where we are right now, in my opinion, is in that yellow box where we're working really hard on standardizing measurement and reporting and communication, and we're starting to see uptake clearly as people are building businesses on this right now, and so it's good, but we have a long way to go. Next slide. So I like to, coming from agriculture, I like to describe EPDs as nutrition labels for products, where, to be more precise, they're a more specific form of an LCA result. But they're the emerging mechanism for communicating life cycle environmental information for products. But rather than nutrition information, the buyer is provided with the product's environmental attributes. And it's really I think, becoming the central mechanism for integrating life cycle thinking into product and market decisions. Next slide. Of course, the analogy isn't perfect. EPDs do not contain baseline values or the equivalence of daily recommended values. That's not what we're talking about. But I use this analogy to demonstrate how nutrition labels have evolved over a century of collaboration among government, industry, NGOs into a system in which policy, science, standards, and measurement and data management have been coordinated to really engender a reliable self-reporting system. And I guess I believe, or I hope, that's the direction we're going as we all muddle through these complicated issues of data availability and data quality, that we're moving toward a system where that's a lot lighter and much less resource intensive to report and communicate. Nutrition labels emerged in I believe it was early 1900, I believe 1906 is the date, in response to the proliferation of processed food. They were just ingredients lists. But beginning in the 70s, through collaboration with USDA, FDA, NIST, industry, NGOs, they evolved into what we now recognize as more quantitative nutrient reporting, which was deployed in the mid-90s. Next slide. And the supply chain, the supply in a nutrition label, there's still the same supply chain considerations that you have in the life cycle of a product. You still have on the left side what we would call background data, which is kind of your data that represents foundational materials like wheat, tomatoes, beef, even sugar, and then intermediate products until your final product. And the equivalent in, say, construction, which I think most folks in this group are involved with, are things like electricity, fossil energy, transportation, waste, and those things all go into wheat and tomatoes and beef too. It's just a matter of perspective. And so this is what we consider as background data, which is a major gap in what we're trying to fill for the development of EPDs. And EPDs, when I present this nutrition analogy, a lot of folks come up and say, well, we're talking about measured data versus modeled data, where nutrition labels are measured and EPDs are modeled, but that's not actually true. The way nutrition labels operate is that there's an ever increasing number of new materials to characterize in the food industry, and nobody is going to be able to characterize and track the nutrient content of all those materials. And so what NIST and USDA have done, they've got together and they've developed basically a standard reference materials, with a list of standard reference materials, which was used to create what they call a food matrix, which is basically a matrix of materials that industry researchers can use as they're developing new materials, can bring their materials to this matrix and self-assess. Basically, it's determine equivalency or near equivalency of the materials they developed to what exists in the standard reference materials. And they use that result to self-assess and report their nutrition information. Next slide. And so this is, over the, more than a century, it's culminated, or it continues to evolve, I'm sure. But it began as a collaboration of FDA, USDA, and NIST and others working in policy, science, measurement, data management. It's evolved into this system that we manage here at the library, Food Data Central, where the government, NGOs, and industry basically collaborate to self-report and provide nutrition labels or nutrition information, not only for nutrition labels, but also the API for this application receives over 30 million hits a year from fitness and nutrition apps and other interesting applications that you might not have expected. And so I look at this as an aspirational model for where we can head. One, to minimize the burden of reporting, but also, you never know, create new industries and opportunities. Next slide. So in the federal LCA Commons, we're early days is the way we look at it. And we are, a group of, it's a coordinated interagency community of practice we have about 20 to 30 experts across 12 agencies and federally funded national labs that are working to coordinate to align the government's diverse LCA capacity to advance LCA data, research and information systems, improve modeling methods consistency, and enhance public access, primarily with the goal to access to what we call background data. It's an informal, unfunded activity, which we just get together and opportunistically collaborate when our missions align. We do have a memorandum of understanding that somewhat formalizes the ability to work together and at least meet monthly, and then also have, collaborate on projects as they pop up. But it's pretty informal at this point. Next slide. But we have groups from across government that are involved in research and methods from the EPA and Department of Energy labs, folks working on knowledge management issues, which we are at NAL, and we collaborate also with folks at NREL and NIST on that, and then folks involved in policy and deployment, primarily Federal Highways Administration, but also some folks at DOE that are working to support IRS on some of the tax credit programs and loan assistance programs. Next slide. And our, I guess, major products to date is we've developed the EPA and the Department of Energy National Energy Technology Laboratory developed a US electricity baseline. EPA manages a common elementary flow list, and we've developed a data management platform. There's a few other data sets that we've developed, including EPA has some heavy equipment operation, and US Forest Service has some wood products, but it's still early days. We haven't made a lot of progress in really building out a background data set and kind of an integrated background data set, and but we're working on it. Next slide. So I've mentioned this concept of background data, and I'm not sure on this call who knows what, but it's basically certain data sets that go into all different types of LCA models. And so it's a number of things, but kind of primarily energy, things like energy, transportation, and waste. That you can see here is the this is a conceptual model derived from the asphalt PCR, that the circles illustrate the background data sets that would be necessary for the PCR. Next slide. And we see, particularly our partners at Federal Highways, but others are pushing for background data as a public good, and that the background data are the value of having public and transparent background data is that it makes products, you're able to basically evaluate products side by side and make them comparable first. And then also it does buy down the cost of generating EPDs for industry. If there are common, consistent background data sets that are available for industry to use, then they can just focus on building their foreground models and using the common background data sets without having to go build electricity data sets every time they want to, or not every time, but whenever they want to build their EPDs, they don't have to generate their own background data sets. A lot of these background data sets are available for fee. When we started, we're committed to the open data model, where, as I mentioned, we kind of see this as a public good, and that we're developing the infrastructure and the data so that the private sector doesn't have to worry about this, and that they can compete on their own products and not worry about the background. But a lot of times, a lot of these databases that are available, particularly in Europe, I think in the previous presentation I mentioned embed, a lot of them are fee-based. And so it's basically a difference in our model is that we're focused on open data, which is challenging, but I think doable in the long run. Next slide. This slide just illustrates a number of challenges we have with the available background data right now, or public background data, including what we have on the LCA Commons. We're fully cognizant that there's a lot of gaps, but you can see this is the NAPA's PCR, and where they've listed the materials and the models required for the PCR, and then also map them to data sets that are available. And as you can see in this slide, one right there in the center, there's a number of data gaps. But then also, as you dig in and look at, say, they've referenced the NREL 2021 US LCI data set. If you go into into the US LCI and look specifically at those models for quicklime and soy biodiesel and coal, you'll see that they're pretty old. And I don't, this isn't a criticism of the US LCI. This is just the way it is. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to address this problem as part of our federal community and bring these up to date and develop a management framework where we can manage them into the future. Next slide. I'm going to talk now a little bit more about the knowledge management infrastructure we're building. For our part here at the NAL, we've developed a knowledge management platform which allows modelers using OpenLCA, the OpenLCA modeling tool, which is the screenshot on the left, to collaborate on data development and management and publish data for public access through the lcacommons.gov. The website is www.lcacommons.gov, which is on the right. Next slide. And fundamentally, the critical aspects of what we've done is we've adopted a common data model, which is underpinned by machine readable exchange formats. They're JSON LD, serialized JSON LD files that can be managed. I'll get into that in a second, that we're evolving to manage as code. And on the left side of this, you can see the platform allows research groups, background data sources, various communities to work in a distributed manner, and then also collaborate on this application that we call the LCA collaboration server, which is we host in our cloud instance. But research communities on the left can basically develop data and collaborate in generating models and manage their own data and then commit it to our servers, and then we can provide access to it. Either there in the lower right by files, people can download the files into their OpenLCA and create APDs or EPDs that way, or by API. And this is where we hope the future is that we can develop partners that are developing EPD creation tools or any kind of tools that they can use to ingest our data by API to increase the automation of the process. Next slide. Diving a little deeper here into the platform, I mentioned that we're treating, and I believe this is, in my mind, this is the innovation, and I think what will kind of move us forward into the future is that we're treating the data as code, and that we're moving away from the concept of kind of a centrally managed and curated database into a framework of more distributed data development management. We're applying Git style data management and version control to our data, which enables distributed data creation and maintenance, so that so you see here on the little cylinders in the middle, we manage our repositories are basically models, what I call PCR model repositories, where the model is hosted in a repository and managed by your program operator or some sort of agency, and the data can be, and the data from there to the right side can be pulled into your modeling software or accessed by API, and you can generate your EPD. On the left side, background data can be managed similar to code libraries. We've set up a function or a feature where background data sets exist in libraries. And if you're familiar with code libraries or at all, code libraries basically hold code that can be reused by various applications. And so it reduces the time necessary you don't have to rebuild code or rewrite code every time you want to build a feature. You can go out and find a code library and integrate it into your application's code. And so that's the similar approach we're taking here with background data, is that, for example, for that asphalt model, the asphalt model draws on waste processes developed by EPA and electricity developed by DOE, and transportation models developed by DOT. And those organizations can manage their own data, and the program operators for the asphalt model can just pull that data in and update it as necessary. Next slide. And so just to reiterate and kind of illustrate this pyramid kind of basically illustrates what I think our role is, or what we think our role is. Below the yellow line is what we consider to be the public good in this industry, and that we can help make progress on some of the data management and background data that private industry may not want to invest in, and so that the industry can compete on product specific modeling data and labels. Next slide. And so, yeah, in summary, we think there's a valuable role for the federal government to play in providing transparent and standardized foundational data to develop EPDs. We've come a long way, but there's still a really long road ahead. I appreciate those comments in the prior discussion about, you know, perfection's the enemy of the good, and that's our philosophy as well. And we're just trying to make incremental progress where we can, and over time, like I illustrated with the nutrition labels, it took, you know, it's taken 100 years to evolve the nutrition labels to where they are now. Of course, it probably won't take us that long because we have that lesson to learn, and we also have better technology and information. But we're still early days in being able to do this, and we're trying to play our part. And of course, the informatics infrastructure is critical in my opinion, and being able to provide access to the data in a way that takes out as much manual work as possible, because those of you working in this area know how manual it is, and certainly has been, and anything we can do to push automation is critical. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, so much. Do we have any questions for Peter? Go ahead, Nicole.
Peter, that was just a terrific presentation. I think you have illustrated so well the complexity ahead of us, but I also am very, very respectful of the fact that you've been down this path before, right? So you have a good sense of what's ahead. I'm really curious about what you see in particular is the low-hanging fruit that could be snatched, that would be like a trailblazer for getting started in the world of sustainability in the federal government and GSA. What is foundational to really get this thing moving?
You mean in terms of procurement?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer to that, because my answer would be information, but I don't necessarily see that as low-hanging fruit. From my perspective, it's really hard. But you know, to something I respect about that nutrition analogy is that, and this is purely me here and not like any type of agency position, but what they did in terms of developing like that food matrix, where you could have a reference list of materials that industry could come in and do it, basically self-assess and self-report. I think something like that is key. And you know, we all know, or maybe not all of us, but a lot of us know how labor intensive a lot of this work is now. Like I said, just because there's so little kind of standardization and consistency and then automation. I think we should also be looking methodologically. You know, I come from, you know, doing LCA in my past life, and I know how labor intensive it is. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that, you know, have developed kind of approaches, 20-minute LCA at Dow Chemical and things like that. I think things we can collaborate on is, you know, I think of it as outside the box because I'm steeped in kind of the process level LCA, but I would think there are really smart methodological opportunities to be able to reduce, basically like reduce the intensity of the LCA and really focus on actually like what are we trying to accomplish, and and I use that food matrix analogy, maybe somehow develop something that is easy for industry to use, that they can build into their existing processes, that they're able to report more easily. Because I don't know, I see Stacy has her hand up, and I know that she and her groups are really neck deep in EPDs, and I've been involved with the asphalt and concrete folks, and that are really having a lot of challenges with consistency of methods and data and reporting. And so in turn, as we continue to improve the information, we might also try to expand our thinking. Maybe there's other ways of kind of measuring and reporting as well. But I don't think that's low-hanging fruit. So I don't know if I can answer that part of your question.
Thank you.
Hey, Stacy.
So Peter, I admire and appreciate where you are in the ecosystem of all this, and the group that's working on this. And I think it's bonkers that there isn't funding for you, or that it's ad hoc as it has been. I don't think that's a problem for the GSA to solve by itself, but I mean, how do we get you funding? And why isn't there funding for you? I mean, that's probably a huge question that you grapple with every day, maybe. But and if you don't want to answer it, it's okay. I'm stating my opinion.
Yeah, we could talk later. It is recording, so there has been so EPA received some money in the IRA,
Right.
and they're going to start making some progress on building some background data, and NREL received money in the last year's omnibus bill to support the federal commons a bit. And so, yeah, but it's not much. But we're going to start, there is some money now to start making progress. And in terms of us, where we sit, I'll just say, I don't know. We're organized under in USDA, and USDA, we're 5 or 10 years behind in terms of EPDs and environmental labeling in that regard. Or I'll say I won't say environmental labeling, but I'll say life cycle labeling that includes LCA. The construction industry is ahead of us. We just haven't had the policy drivers in agriculture yet. But the reason why we exist is we see it coming. It just hasn't happened yet. And so, to answer your question, that's really the answer to your question. In USDA, we haven't had those major drivers yet.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, David Wagger, co-chair. We have about 5 minutes left in the discussion on your excellent presentation, Peter. I had a few questions. So I noticed in the asphalt EPD, it had the data gap. As an engineer, I always think of things as approximations, plus or minus 15, 20%. Was that a significant data gap in terms of, let's say, the carbon relevance of it to everything else? And is there a way to sort of approximate that so we don't get stuck on something that's relatively immaterial that prevents progress elsewhere? That's kind of one question. And the other one is as you may have seen in the CIEVO presentation, they make a reference to third-party data providers in sort of what I would call the background data.
Yeah.
And I took that to be kind of equivalent to the LCA commons that you're talking about. I guess the question is, have you kind of compared the two data sets to see whether they're consistent, or do we need a US specific one versus some kind of globally averaged one? I'm sure that Amlan and Stacy and others who are more deep in the weeds, and you and deep in the weeds, just trying to figure out whether that's important to what we're trying to accomplish in terms of a recommendation to GSA.
Mm-hmm. Stacy might be able to answer both those better than I can, but I would say that, in terms of your second question, in terms of background data set, yeah, I mean, that's where we fit. We're trying to provide data for tools like Cievo's built and that they can use. And yeah, and we're trying to do it in, open, for free. And so, that's a challenge to kind of the current model where people have private for free or for fee databases. We haven't compared, we're not far enough along yet. We haven't compared, our data to other data. But there is the sentiment that we should have US specific data. And this isn't I work with the EcoInvent folks all the time. This isn't a criticism of EcoInvent, but, a lot of their data are, they modify European models, say background data models, they modify it to loosely fit the US, the US economy, which, it's fine depending on what you're doing with it. But I think, it's one thing to do LCA in like a microeconomic sense. And like, if you're a company that you're trying to understand your supply chain and optimize your supply chain, that's one thing. You can still do that with those types of data sets. But when you're starting to use it in public policy, I think that's started to be the driver for, hey, we need something that represents the US. And so with that being said, I think one of also the elephants in the room that we haven't had the bandwidth to deal with is we say that, and that's a nice tagline, that we need US data. But we all know supply chains are rarely purely domestic anymore, and that, materials are coming from everywhere. And so that's kind of that for us in the federal commons, we can't even think about that yet, because we're still trying to think about how we're going to develop US data. But we've been in conversations with the Canadian government and primarily the Canadian government, but we also collaborate with Europeans quite a bit too. And that's kind of the next frontier, is what do we do when we want to integrate international supply chains? To answer your first question, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the details of the PCR and those particular data sets. And like I said, I think Stacy could probably answer that better than I can.
Well, thank you for answering all of our questions. And I'm sure there are lots more that we would love to ask and have answered, but we don't have time. So I'd like to thank Peter. Thank you again for making a very interesting and thoughtful presentation, as well as to the folks at Cievo for their presentation. I think we next go into our subcommittee discussion. And I'm trying to think what the best way is to go about that.
So yes, Dave, so I was going to say yes. So now we can go into the second half of our meeting. And just to let everyone know that both of the presentations will be posted to the website after this meeting. And for our guests, again, we just sincerely thank you. You do not have to stay for this half of the meeting if you don't like, but if so, you're more than welcome. And Dave, it'll be left up to you. If you'd like to begin the second half of this discussion with the Jamboard, we can have Dave pull that up, or if you would just like to enter into the discussion of what we've just heard right now from our guest speakers, we can begin that way as well. It's up to you.
I'm going to take a risk. I'm not a real risk taker. Let's go with the Jamboard. So I guess this is our own version of crowdsourcing everyone's reactions to what we heard, and maybe think about, given everything we've heard, what are our challenges, what are our opportunities, what do we think we can reasonably recommend that's actionable, which is, I think, is the key we need to keep in mind about, whether we can take what we've heard today and other things we've heard before and things we will consider and come up with a recommendation that we think GSA could take and implement in some time frame. So I guess open it up to anybody, what they thought was important that we heard today. You can speak or you can do it on the Jamboard. Is there a link in the, is there a link?
We're getting there right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
David, I could talk about this all day because this is what I live and breathe all day. So I'm trying not to.
You volunteering to present?
I'm just this is what this is what building transparency does, is environmental product declarations and database of them and all that stuff for the construction sector. So I have all sorts of things I could say, but maybe I'll just put them on sticky notes. I think to answer the questions you asked that that he pointed back maybe to me, what's been successful in construction is that we took that model of not waiting for perfection to start to create the ability for folks to access the data through EPDs in their imperfect state, and then drive for the procurement folks to actually request more and more specific data, and have them understand the fact that they're imperfect to help them then drive to make them more perfect with better underlying data and more accurate accounting in the product category rules. So I think we're on the right path there, and the product category rules are really where someone could put in a requirement to use a certain underlying data set or point to the LCA Commons as an input for an emissions factor. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the construction sector, and it's the one that's going to kind of lead this all forward. And then all of the Inflation Reduction Act funding that came through, the $6 billion for low carbon procurement, there's $100 million in there for a labeling program that the EPA is developing with that funding, leveraging EPDs. So that's kind of in process also. And then the GSA, of course, has $2 billion already in terms of funding to spend on low carbon construction products that have EPDs and meet a certain threshold they've established. So there's a lot going on. I think there's opportunities for the GSA to leverage EPDs in the construction sector probably more robustly than just through the IRA funding. They already have it included in the SF tool, which I think it was this group that saw that. Maybe it was the other committee, but there's ways that the GSA is already doing that. But yeah, this is kind of my rambling thoughts. I'll stop.
That's all very interesting. I don't know, this may be a question for Boris or Stephanie or any federal staff person. Does this suggest that all the agencies should actually start budgeting for it to be a routine part of their budget rather than relying on specific legislation to provide pools of money? Is that something that's happening? I really don't know.
To be honest, Dave, I couldn't answer that.
Yeah, that is a complex topic. I do want to note that the link to the Jamboard is in the chat. So if you're on the GAPPAC subcommittee, you should be able to hop on that link and get on the Jamboard and add some stickies. But that is a complex topic, definitely. The budget versus what comes down through executive orders and whatnot. But as Stephanie said, that definitely a complex deal. Although Peter raised some really good points about the the funding and the need for putting that kind of focus on this.
Hi, this is Rich. As a non-technical procurement person, I have a kind of a simple question. Most federal regulations have to go through a fairly rigorous cost-benefit analysis through ORIA, using established methods to ascertain cost-benefit and the like. With the use of EPDs, is it contemplated that they too would go through an ORIA-like cost-benefit review? It's clearly a ambitious new framework with attendant cost associated with it. So when compared to nutritional labeling, for example, has there been any concrete assessment of improvements to public health, for example, things of that nature that would be applied here? Over.
Do you want me to take a stab at that? So I know that during the crafting of the IRA, there was a panel that met with the drafters of the language for the low carbon procurement section that did some of that, Richard. That looked at it more than just, there was emissions modeling of how much emissions reduction could be potentially achieved through the use of EPDs and the kind of drive toward decarbonization through their use. And there was some talk of public health and other things with the working groups during that process. But I don't think there's been like an authoritative approach to that yet. And then on the actual cost of production too, to the, the cost of manufacturers have to go through the process is another area that that we've helped analyze, actually.
Well, then the question becomes, should there be more rigorous assessment in that regard? We're seeing, for example, in the IT space, the implementation order called CMMC, cybersecurity requirements, that NIST has come up with a series of security controls and technical requirements to ensure the products are safe and secure. And so that framework, while very expensive, has a very tangible assessment of benefit for doing it with some clarity and the like. And so when I see new approaches and additional frameworks come out, I always wonder if we've really looked at whether they're going to work. What does it mean? What is success? How do you define success with this new framework is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are standards that are, ISO standards that dictate the process of generating the EPD, and the product category rules set up the parameters for what's included so that the data can be then verified. So in terms of how EPDs are made, I think there's lots of standards in place that are, globally adopted and in use, and we're improving what the PCRs say to make the EPD results even better. So on that side, I think it's there. Are you talking more about the use of EPDs in procurement?
Well, yeah, because I mean, I'm a procurement guy, and I always look at it in that regard. I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, what is the definition? If you put this process into place, similar to nutritional labeling, can you definitively assess the outcome for using this expensive system? And what would success look like? Some overall reduction in carbon emissions, and so how does that? So that's where I was.
I can answer that question now. I understand, but so the way that we actually assisted the IRA funding in terms of its drafting was we used the data that we could pull out of our database of EPDs that has been in place for 5 years to show where private sector procurement folks like Microsoft, for instance, in Washington, went through the process of requiring EPDs for concrete, assessing bidders on the carbon emissions of the EPD results and the cost, and then implementing that on a project, that leading to an 18% reduction in emissions from the plants that were providing the concrete to that project, because they went and optimized their mixes and got EPDs for the lower carbon way they could make concrete. So it gets back to the data and the ability to leverage the data and what it tells you and the trends you see as the data is used out of EPDs to show that decarbonization happening from the suppliers that are, engaging and kind of leading and trying to be the first in the market to be available for those procurers.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Nicole.
Hey there. This conversation has me thinking about an earlier discussion that we had in the acquisition workforce subcommittee meeting. And as we were talking with individuals about the difficulty of getting good data, and that seems to be the common theme between these two discussions today, is data access, data security. That's like the thing that's sticking for me. And the notion of not letting perfect get in the way of good, because it's easy to do nothing. And the response to that is we should not do nothing. But what came out of our discussions and talking with the GSA focus group was that what we're really thinking about here as we utilize sustainability information and pivot the workforce towards using different types of information it also, and this sounds big, but I'm going to put it out there because it's really stuck with me. It's that GSA isn't organized in a way to assemble these data, right? And it was a suggestion internally. I have a tough time remembering the fellow's name. I want to say it was Brad, but I can't remember his last name, the data guy. He said, really, we need to get serious about this and create an office of data and information, and really think differently about the needs that are going to be required in order to, so then it's not just about data, you have to integrate systems, you have to think about existing technologies that are needed, how the different technologies are going to talk with one another. And it's going to require dedicated resources to do that beyond saying develop a task force. That might be the first step to disentangling this broader problem, but it's really putting focused resources on this critical topic, because it's impossible to measure outcomes appropriately unless we get the good data there. It's impossible for us then to be able to state that we're achieving our goals if we don't have good data and centralized data and transparent data. And it just seems to me that we need better structures internally in order to get there.
And that is a good point, Nicole. And I definitely, I know I remember that conversation well. And one of the things that we're talking, there is a chief data officers council that was stood up. So every agency has a chief data officer. So there's been a lot of conversation about that, but I will tell you, I haven't seen what you're talking about, like an office of data, like put the data scientists together. Because listening to Ilona and Peter just brings to mind that this is an area that's right, not just on sustainability, but in other areas too.
And it's a blind spot.
Yeah.
It's a blind spot. It's a topic that we took really seriously within the acquisition workforce subcommittee, but it doesn't connect with our committee. It connects with this one. This is it.
Nicole, I appreciate everything you said, because I think this connects with all the committees. But, one thing that we saw in the CIEVO presentation is someone's got to actually make decisions based on the data that gets represented, and whatever representation, by, raw ingredient or by product or by spend, or however, not spending in terms of producing the emissions data, but, what are the big categories where we can make the biggest impact on reducing carbon emissions? I think the workforce is going to have good information and a good representation of what it means in order to make good decisions. And I think, one thing that I think differs between, say, a governmental need and, let's say, a private company need is the government. I don't know if the government necessarily has to have targets, but I think continual improvement. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is how can we keep sort of the trend going down and down and down, even if there's no specific target? Now, it helps to have a target because it gives you something to drive toward, but I do think that does connect into the acquisition workforce, because they're going to have to make the decisions.
I totally agree. And if the workforce doesn't trust the data, they become disempowered.
Oh, absolutely true.
Yeah. So if we want to achieve the goals, we have to have the good data. I think that the starting point is to ask what structure is needed in order to ensure it.
Yeah, and I think there are two levels here. There is the acquisition workforce, but you also have the programs. And so when I was looking at those dashboards that Ilona was showing, I'm thinking that would be really great information for the folks that are making decisions on suppliers, but also the programs that have targets. How well are they doing? So I almost see it playing in two levels here.
To drag in perhaps something from industry partnerships about maturity models is that, can we kind of build this system, scale it up, focus on one metric and then add other metrics as you go along to sort of complete the menu of, let's say, metrics that we need to consider when making a decision. And we've talked about, think about, so maybe you want to have the biggest carbon reduction for the dollar, the marginal dollar. So you don't spend all your money on this, but you spend enough to get the biggest sort of return, and then you spend your money on other things. I don't think we know, what that might look like in practice. So, how can we build a system that lets us do that? Because I don't think we can just wait and then wait till we have everything and then put it together. I think we're going to have to stand something up, or something will have to be stood up, even if it's limited, and then have that able to grow. I think that's what we would have to do as a practical matter.
Good point, David. Very good point.
Yeah, I just know the question. I don't know the answer to it. I'm not thinking that's not even necessarily the right question, but I think we have a few more minutes in our sort of key takeaway and summary here. I think if I see the agenda correctly, then we'll open it up to public comments. Is that right?
Mhm.
Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak, wish to do so.
I'm sorry, was I being called upon there?
You did say something earlier. So,
Yes.
so you're
Yeah.
not forbidden from saying anything. We just have a few more minutes until we open it up to the public.
No, I appreciate the speakers. I thought that was most informative, and was unaware of the complexity that goes into this, and appreciate the chance to learn more about it. That's basically it for me.
All right, David. And if we don't have anyone that have any more comments, we can go directly to public comments at this time. We could be a little bit ahead of schedule. I don't think anybody will be upset about that. So right now, we'd like to open up the floor for public comments. If you have any comments that you would like to share or questions you would like to ask at this time, please feel free to do so from the public. Okay, it looks like we don't have any public comments at this time, so we'll continue on. So,
All right, so it looks like it's up to me. So I want to thank again our presenters, Ilona, Ossi, and Peter, for your wonderful presentations. Gives us a lot to think about, and I think makes at least me realize how connected all of our subcommittee work is, sort of all interconnected in this area of data. Boris and Stephanie, can you remind me when our next meeting is? The date for that?
Hey,
yes,
Stephanie.
our
Yeah, go
next
ahead,
meeting will
Stephanie.
be, okay, our next meeting will be March 21st from 3 to 5.
So, anyone have any final comments before we officially adjourn? Okay, well, again, I thank everyone for their time and their energy and interest. I want to thank Boris and Stephanie and David and Bianca, and also my chair, Luke, who did a lot of background work to make the presentations possible, and Amlan as well. So think about all of these things prior to our next meeting. And if anyone wants to volunteer to present, I kind of threw it out there, Stacy, no pressure. Feel free to let us know. So have a great evening, afternoon, wherever you are, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you all again. A reminder that the public comments and suggestions can be submitted to regulation.gov. We wish you a great rest of your day. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Boris, David, and Bianca.